I wanted to do something a little bit different in this video, and I think talking about Generation 2 Bionicle a second time in a day is probably not strategically advantageous for the channel, but it is important. You see, there's something kind of wrong with Generation 2 Bionicle. I don't have to yell that from the rooftops. A lot of people would agree with me, but I don't think it's necessarily what everybody thinks it is. In part, there are a lot of people who say that, well, the IP was kind of handled pretty bad in Generation 2. I would agree with that. The advertising wasn't always good. I would agree with that as well. And there are a lot of other things you can sort of lament about the Generation 2 Bionicle. Here's the thing, though. When it started off in 2015, when it kickstarted, I was pretty impressed with what I saw. It was not perfect by any means, but the master sets were really solid for what they were. They did go against some of the norms that we had seen from previous years of Bionicle, but at the end of the day, this was a soft reboot. There were changes in the characters for better or for worse, and that's fine, you know? However, we started seeing something even from the first wave that started to bother me, and it only built up as time went on. And it's this lack of faith in the theme. It feels like, at least to me. Here's the thing. In the last video, I talked a little bit about consistency, and I wanted to expand on that a little bit because Bionicle Generation 2 did one thing very specific, and I think it did it well at first, but not perfect, and there was room for improvement. However, it just continued to go downhill. In fact, most things that I think the Masters did well, that was the highlight. And that's not good. You want a theme to improve over time, or at the very least not fall. But this felt like it was getting worse with every wave. Here's the thing. The master sets, for all their flaws, are pretty good sets. At the end, they're, you know, essentially Toa, Mata, the revolutionary thing that they introduced as a gearbox, something we had seen before, but I'm glad it made a return, especially to something like CCBS. You don't get a lot of change out of taking that gearbox out and just putting the arms on the ball sockets on the torso, but it's at least nice to have seen that they did something, and of course it messes with the proportions as well. But what LEGO did try to do, and I want to emphasize the word try, is associate each of the characters with a specific color scheme. The problem with this is that they weren't consistent with it. In fact, they changed it too quickly, in my opinion. That's not to say, of course, that characters can't change, because of course they can. In the last video, I sort of praised the look of Galley Master and Galley Uniter, even though neither are my favorite from their respective waves. They're both fine sets. They're kind of middle of the road in terms of the design overall, but I will say that the color schemes on there are quite nice, in my opinion. You can see Galley Master back there, although she's hiding in the shadow, so hard to really point out her color scheme, and that, of course, is a mod as well. If you want to check that out, check out the last video. That said, though, what colors are Galley Master and Galley Uniter? Because I would argue that she is dark azure, at least in her master form, yellow to a degree. Not a lot of it, but enough to know that it's a secondary color, and transparent blue. But what transparent blue? That's hard to say, actually, because LEGO chose 2 transparent blues for her, and this was clearly a choice that they made because they didn't want to produce the bone piece in trans dark blue. That's more money at the end of the day. But recolors are not the most expensive thing for LEGO. This was just a corner that was cut because they didn't want to put extra money into it. Now, that's fine. I can accept that. The trans light blue looks just fine on her as a character, and arguably, you could say it looks even more aquatic. However, it continues because this sort of concept would sort of crop up again through each of the different waves. Little thing, the Protector of Fire having a trans yellow top of his mask instead of trans orange, which is fine. It actually looks quite nice, but it's a little weird. It goes out of the way from what you would expect. Okay, I can accept that. No, the issue I really have, though, is that consistency. It's hinted at with color schemes. Sure, they're not always the best. I loved the aesthetic of Liwa Master with the bright orange balanced really nicely with the bright orangish yellow or bright light orange, whatever you want to call the color, Keat orange, you know. For them to replace it with yellow in the second wave, it still looked good, but it was lacking that warmth that I think really was necessary. And again, was clearly done because Lego was using these yellow axles and they just kind of wanted to, I don't know, skirt that recoloring new pieces again, right? So it was unfortunate to have seen it, and you saw through that Uniter wave a more heavy emphasis on transparent colors specifically. I do have an issue with this, and I feel like my gripes can continue about that into a different video and how that sort of alienates the characters that they were trying to create. But what I actually wanted to talk about, now it's been 5.5 minutes, I can get to the point. How many new molds are there in the Uniter line? And how many of those molds are exclusive, are unique to those characters? Not a lot, actually. Throughout the wave, there's a decent number of new molds, obviously the torso and the hip piece, the new crystallized armor, sure, and of course the masks, the weapons, etc. But how many of them are unique between each of the sets? How many of them do not show up again between those sets? One piece. That bothers me. With the Masters wave, see, I was impressed with how Lego handled the weapons, because although we only got 4 weapon molds in that Master wave, they did all at least come in unique colors. Kopaka's white Lycanis-esque sword was a different color from Tahu's, and was obviously a different version from Lycan's sword back in 2004. The axe piece used on Liwa and on Gali also came in different colors, though I think they should have been swapped, but that's fine, that's something you can do yourself. But then you look at the Skull villains, something that I think get a bad rap, not always, rightfully so, but I understand some of the gripes with them. And how many new molds do you get there? Suddenly, you go from having these 6 brand new masks and these, I was gonna say torsos, don't know why, and the Protector mask as well, and the Skull Spider mask. So 8 masks in that first wave to just 2. That bothers me. And even here, they couldn't be bothered to recolor the masks all that much. At the very least, something like Skull Slicer could have had a gunmetal spider mask to justify its existence in yet another set, but even that gets worse when you look at the Uniters. 2 weapons from the Skull villains turns into 1 weapon from the Uniters, and then you get to the Beasts, and there are 0 new weapons for the Beasts. 1 new mask. This is what I mean. At the same time as Bionicle Generation 2 existed, Lego was also experimenting with the Star Wars CCBS sets, many of which came with brand new and sometimes even unique pieces. So why couldn't Lego invest that same budget into something like Bionicle? They didn't have faith in it. There are probably other strategic reasons as well. Surely Star Wars was going to sell better. It's a established IP, and Bionicle was basically trying to pick up the pieces, I guess pun intended, from what had come before, while also being its own thing, and that's just hard to do, especially on the coattails of Bionicle. Time had not really passed as much as it seemed like. As long as it felt from Bionicle Generation 1's cancellation to Generation 2's beginning, we've doubled that time, just about, since then. But the consistency, having a little faith in a theme is important. This isn't to say you can't have pieces shared amongst sets, because I think you should. That crystallized armor is a cool looking piece, admittedly. But it's clear where Lego was choosing to cut corners and how much of a lack of character it felt like there was here, how hollow they felt, because at the very least with the Masters sets, each one looked like they filled a specific role to a degree. Not so strongly as I would say the Mata versions of the characters, sure, but at least they did something. But by the time you get to the Uniters, you look at something like Onua Uniter, and he looks the same as all the others. Sure, he's got bigger, clunkier feet, and he's still got some broad shoulder pads, but overall the build is still similar, you know? And a lot of people praised the fact that they used these sort of semi-custom torsos, and that was cool. But if you look at that on the box, it just puffs up the parts count for honestly little reward. No, I like the fact that a character like Pohatu Uniter, for all of my gripes that I have with them, has at least these custom shoulders that kind of move in a really interesting way. That's something I can enjoy. And although I've never been a huge fan of the side-to-side waist motion of basically any Bionicle set to date, it's still refreshing to see a new take, to see that they were trying to do something different. And I can admire this in all of its iterations. The Lord of Skull Spider set, rather, is not a great set, but at least they tried to do something with it, and the function is cool, even if it really doesn't work. One of the reasons I build Rahi sets, especially classic Rahi, is that more often than not, their functions had a purpose. With the Master Builder set, it was a little more fun, because not all of their functions were designed to knock masks off or to be combative. But with 2001's Rahi specifically, all of their functions had to perform a specific goal, and each one did actually a pretty good job, all things considered. The reason that the Nui Rama, for example, have flexible wing pieces is not just to make them softer, because it really doesn't do that, but is to make sure that they can connect. Because with a hard axle there, they can't, and it's much harder to land your shot when you don't know exactly where in space it's going to be. But allowing these axles to flick around a little bit not only broadens the area that they can hit, but it actually introduces more force. It's crazy to think about. It's almost like when you think about how a whip can basically crack the speed of sound. It's such a cool concept because your arm's not moving that fast, but that motion is translated through space. I can't explain this well. I don't know the exact physics behind it, but it's a fascinating phenomenon. And to a degree, this works on the Nui Rama sets as well. If you've ever been hit by the wings on them, they sting, they hurt, and it's fun. And they work really well to knock masks off with something that has such a minimal mass to it. How it is so capable of knocking masks off. Meanwhile, you have something like the Lord of Skull Spider set with 6 moving legs that honestly can't do much. I don't know if I've ever personally had it remove a mask, and that's not to say that it can't. Surely it can, but it requires a pretty tedious setup, let's say. No, it's a cool function, but it doesn't perform well, and it doesn't lean into the mask game of Generation 2. And no sets really did up until the Skull Villains, because LEGO kind of learned their lesson and realized that, oh, this system that we developed for knocking masks off, it's not actually that good. It's fine, and it does work, but it more or less works because you might move the head the wrong way and the mask falls off, because the masks are not designed to be hit from the front. They're designed to be pulled from behind, or you to hit the eyepiece from behind as well. And that's not as easy as you would think, especially if you're playing with another kid who suddenly has to try to hold their figure where the eyepiece is never facing you. They got it right the first time. At the end of the day, Generation 2 Bionicle feels like, at part, it failed to live up to a legacy because it lacked character. It lacked faith in its characters to carry its theme. I don't know how well sets like Hero Factory sold, but I have to imagine that upgrading from there would have at least sold, if not better, to the same kind of audience. And part of the reason that LEGO actually went out of their way to introduce, at least in my opinion, to introduce all of these new colors and transparent pieces here and there was to sort of stand out from what came before. Because Hero Factory was also colorful CCBS robots. So how do you make your Toa figures stand out if they're using the same system? You can call them by another name, but no kid's gonna know the difference. Allowing them to be different colors, though, from a different place, a different world, does help. But it alone is not enough. A wave of figures that are different colors isn't enough to sell the wave. Not in my opinion. Anyway, not without having some backing to base it off. You'll notice that outside of 2009 Bionicle, all of the Toa sets that we basically received in the form of a wave from Bionicle were characters that we had seen previously. Even if you had gotten into Bionicle later in its lifespan, At the very least, you may have heard of characters like Jala or Kangu or etc. That's not to say there weren't unique characters as well. Of course there were. And again, 2009 was full of them. But it built on what had come before. CCBS, to me, at least for Bionicle Generation 2, didn't. It tried to have its cake and eat it too, without, I guess, putting in the effort to make a good cake. I don't know how else to phrase it. With that said, there is a lot to love about Generation 2 Bionicle. It is not perfect, but some really good things came out of it. Yes, you can complain about the skull villains being generic, and I'd be right there alongside you. And at the very least, we had something like Umarak the Hunter, which is such a refreshing take on a villain. I'm not somebody who holds him up to some high standard thinking he's, oh, the best this, that, or the other, but he's a good set. He's solid, he's strong. And he has a lot of his own character and identity. And then to move that into something like Umarak the Destroyer, it feels bad. It loses a lot of that special character to just be another big, ugly monster. The Destroyer? What does that say about the character? And yes, I understand that it plays into the story of the character, but it makes your big bad feel less imposing to some degree. I like the idea of being corrupted by a mask. I'm using it in the Bara Magna expansion project, but there's better ways to handle it that can respect the character. Of course, at the end of the day, it's a toy and you can kind of put your own story behind it, but I don't know. I don't know where Bionicle goes from here. That's the craziest part about all of this. Part of it, we all know that Bionicle lives on through us, through its fan base. And everybody has a different idea of what Bionicle is, what was the best and worst times for them, their favorite and least favorite sets. And I can ask so many people and get 1,000 different answers and 1,000 different reasons for why they think the things they do. Generation 2 Bionicle lacks a lot of that. That's unfortunate, because there's a lot to love. It's not perfect, but I'm glad we got it. It's a good system to build on, and I highly recommend, if you do own any of the sets, to make your own take at it. I would show you one. I can kind of show you one that I have here. He's not wearing a mask right now, so I guess I'll give him a Pohatu Uniter's mask. But my own take on my Pohatu, which is missing some of his parts. He doesn't have his weapons right now. This is actually an archaeologist version, or rather, I guess, a treasure hunter, if you will, version of Pohatu, and I love it. Now, here's the thing. I do like that sort of Australian outback kind of feel that we got for Pohatu Master. It's different, but it's refreshing. It was abandoned pretty quickly, unfortunately, in my opinion. But giving the character some kind of story insinuated by the build feels good. And that's the last thing I want to touch on before I end this video. Remember that as a consumer, you can ask of the companies that you respect, sometimes deliver on what you want. It doesn't mean you're going to get everything, but you should never feel like you need to be some kind of Lego sycophant or something, like you need to defend their every decision. Because Lego, like everybody, is fallible. They make mistakes. They do things that people like and they do things that people don't like, and that's okay. You can't please everyone at the end of the day. But remember, I will say that when you go out, 2015 Bionicle, spending $15 to $20 per set, they should have a little more different between them than just a mask. That's pretty much it for this one, guys. If you did enjoy the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Hopefully the music was fitting. We'll see. I have no idea how it's going to sound. I did do some sound tests. With that said, though, if you want to join the conversation, you can, of course, comment below. And, of course, check out the links in the description for Discord, Instagram, or Patreon if you want to support the channel. Get some perks in the description. And I will see you all in the next one. Take care.